The quarterly portfolio review spread across my mahogany desk showed exactly what I'd expected: another record-breaking performance that would make my competitors weep into their morning coffee. My investment firm, Meridian Capital Management, had just closed the best quarter in our 12-year history, with assets under management reaching $2.8 billion and returns averaging 14.7% across all client portfolios. Not bad for a company that started in a converted garage with $50,000 in seed money and a business plan scribbled on legal pads. I'm Rebecca Chen, 42 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years building what Forbes recently called one of the most innovative wealth management firms on the West Coast. My specialty is identifying undervalued opportunities in emerging markets and tech startups, investments that traditional firms dismiss as too risky, but that consistently generate exceptional returns for clients willing to trust my judgment. My assistant knocked on the door, interrupting my review of the Asian semiconductor positions that had gained 34% this quarter. "Rebecca, your cousin David called about the family reunion logistics. He needs to confirm your attendance for the catering count." I glanced at my calendar. The annual Chen family reunion was next weekend at Aunt Margaret's estate in Marin County. 3 days of forced socialization with relatives who alternated between treating me like an outsider and asking for investment advice, depending on their current financial needs. "Tell him I'll be there," I said, already dreading the inevitable conversations about why I wasn't married, why I worked so much, and why I never brought a nice boyfriend to family events. The Chen family reunions had been a tradition for 23 years, ever since my grandfather's death left Aunt Margaret as the unofficial family matriarch. She inherited his Victorian mansion overlooking San Francisco Bay, along with his role as keeper of family traditions and distributor of family wisdom. Every summer, 3 generations of Chens gathered for a weekend of barbecues, group photos, and carefully orchestrated activities designed to maintain family bonds. I'd attended every reunion since I was 19, though my participation had evolved from enthusiastic young cousin to polite but distant family member. The transformation happened gradually as my career success created an uncomfortable dynamic with relatives who viewed wealth with suspicion and ambition with disapproval. My grandfather would have understood my drive. He'd immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but determination and built a small electronics importing business that supported 3 generations of family members. But he died when I was 18, before he could see me establish my own version of the American dream. The drive to Marin County took 90 minutes through weekend traffic, giving me time to mentally prepare for 3 days of family politics. Aunt Margaret's estate sprawled across 5 acres of manicured gardens and rolling lawns, with the main house commanding spectacular views of the bay. The property was worth approximately $4.2 million, a fortune that had allowed Margaret to maintain her position as family benefactor and social coordinator. Cars filled the circular driveway when I arrived. David's Honda Civic, Cousin Lisa's minivan loaded with car seats and soccer equipment, Uncle Peter's pickup truck from his contracting business. I parked my Tesla Model S at the edge of the circle, already anticipating the comments about fancy electric cars and showing off. The front door opened before I could knock. Margaret stood there in her usual reunion outfit, white linen pants, and a flowing blue blouse that she believed made her look bohemian and artistic. At 68, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about money or wonder where her next meal was coming from. "Rebecca, you made it. I was beginning to worry you decided work was more important than family again." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, handing her the bottle of wine I'd brought, a 2018 Opus one that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. How thoughtful. Though you know we usually just drink the house wine at these gatherings. The house wine was a $12 Trader Joe's blend that Margaret bought by the case, but I'd learned years ago that bringing expensive gifts only highlighted the economic gulf between my lifestyle and the family's more modest circumstances. The main living room buzzed with conversation as relatives caught up on the year's events. Uncle Peter dominated one corner, explaining to David's teenage son why college was overrated when skilled trades offered better job security. Cousin Lisa chased her twin 8-year-olds while trying to participate in Aunt Ruth's monologue about her upcoming retirement from teaching. I moved through the room, exchanging hugs and updating relatives on my life in carefully edited summaries that downplayed my professional success and emphasized my connection to family values. Yes, business was going well. No, I hadn't met anyone special. Yes, I was still working too much. No, I didn't have any exciting vacation plans. Rebecca, David's wife Jennifer, waved me over to the kitchen island where she was arranging appetizers. We were just talking about college funds for the kids. Lisa was saying how impossible it is to save enough for tuition these days. It's terrifying, Lisa agreed, shifting her youngest daughter to her other hip. State school tuition alone is $15,000 a year now. By the time Emma's ready for college, it'll probably be $25,000. I don't know how middle-class families are supposed to afford it. Maybe she won't need college, Uncle Peter called from across the room. Plenty of good jobs don't require a degree. My apprentice electricians make $60,000 their first year. That's not the point, Dad, David replied. We want the kids to have options. Options are expensive, Margaret observed, joining our conversation. That's why family support is so important. When my generation was starting families, we could count on help from parents and grandparents. Now everyone's so focused on individual success that family obligations get forgotten. I recognized the subtle criticism embedded in her comment. Margaret had strong opinions about family loyalty and frequently expressed concern that younger generations were too selfish and career-focused to maintain traditional family bonds. Some of us do what we can, I said carefully. Of course, dear. But it's not the same as the old days when families really took care of each other. The conversation continued around me as I nodded and made appropriate responses. But my mind was elsewhere, thinking about the family trust account that I'd established 10 years ago through my investment firm. The Chen Family Education Fund contained $1.2 million in carefully managed investments, generating approximately $84,000 annually in returns that could be distributed for college tuition, educational expenses, or family emergencies. None of them knew about the trust because I'd structured it to appear as if the funding came from an anonymous donor with connections to my grandfather's old business associates. Margaret administered the distributions, believing that a wealthy stranger had chosen to honor my grandfather's memory by supporting his descendants' education. Over the past decade, the trust had paid for David's MBA program, Lisa's nursing degree, and partial tuition for 3 of the younger cousins. Margaret regularly praised the mysterious benefactor's generosity while lamenting that her own family members weren't financially successful enough to provide similar support. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was simultaneously criticized for being too focused on money and praised for the financial support I provided, support that none of them realized came from me. Dinner was served on the back terrace, with views of the bay sparkling in the evening light. Margaret had hired the same caterer she used every year, a local company that specialized in upscale comfort food, herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, artisanal bread, and chocolate mousse for dessert. The cost for feeding 35 people was approximately $2,400, which I knew because I'd been discreetly reimbursing Margaret for reunion expenses for the past 5 years. "Before we eat," Margaret announced, standing at the head of the table with a wine glass in hand, "I want to share some wonderful news about our family education fund." The table quieted as everyone turned their attention to her. Margaret loved being the center of attention, especially when she could share good news or take credit for positive developments. "As you all know, we've been blessed to have an anonymous benefactor supporting our family's educational goals for the past 10 years. This year, I'm excited to announce that the fund has grown enough to provide full tuition assistance for Tommy's engineering program and partial support for Rachel's graduate school applications." Applause erupted around the table. David's 17-year-old son, Tommy, beamed with pride, while Lisa's 15-year-old daughter, Rachel, looked stunned by her good fortune. "But that's not all," Margaret continued, clearly enjoying her role as bearer of good news. "Our benefactor has also approved emergency funding to help Peter with his medical expenses from last year's surgery." Uncle Peter looked genuinely moved. He'd been struggling with bills from his hernia operation, and his contractor's insurance hadn't covered all the costs. "I don't know how to thank this person," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Whoever they are, they've been a blessing to our family." "Indeed they have," Margaret agreed. "Which brings me to an important point about family loyalty and support." Her tone shifted, becoming more serious. I felt a familiar tension building in my chest, the same feeling I got when Margaret launched into one of her lectures about family values and generational responsibility. We're fortunate to have someone outside our family who cares enough to support us. But it makes me wonder why we can't provide that same level of support for each other from within our own family. She paused, her eyes scanning the table before landing on me. "Some family members have been blessed with financial success, but haven't shared those blessings with the people who raised them, who supported them, who made their success possible." The table went silent except for the distant sound of waves against the shoreline below. Everyone understood that Margaret was talking about me, though she was too polite to say so directly. "I think it's important for all of us to remember that family comes first," she continued. "Before business, before personal ambition, before anything else. That's what makes us strong as a unit." David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Lisa studied her wine glass with intense concentration. Uncle Peter cleared his throat, but didn't speak. They all knew this speech was directed at me, and they were all waiting to see how I would respond. "I agree that family is important," I said carefully. "We all support each other in different ways." "Do we?" Margaret's voice carried a sharp edge now. "Because I look around this table, and I see people who've struggled with college tuition, medical bills, and home repairs, while other family members accumulate wealth without sharing it." "Margaret," David started, but she waved him off. "No, this needs to be said. We have someone in our family who could easily afford to help with Tommy's tuition or Peter's medical bills or any of the other expenses that have caused stress and worry for people at this table." She was looking directly at me now, no longer pretending to address the group generally. "But instead of family support, we've had to rely on the kindness of strangers. That says something about our values and our priorities." I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but I kept my voice level. "I've never been asked to help with any of those expenses." "You shouldn't have to be asked," Aunt Ruth chimed in from across the table. "Family members should offer help when they see others struggling, especially when they have more money than they could spend in a lifetime," Lisa added quietly. The attack was coordinated, I realized. They'd planned this confrontation, probably discussed it in advance, and decided that the reunion dinner would be the perfect venue for publicly shaming me into financial compliance. I think there's been a misunderstanding about my financial situation, I said. Has there? Margaret leaned forward. Because according to that Forbes article David showed me, your investment firm manages almost $3 billion. Even if you only keep a small percentage of that, you're incredibly wealthy. Managing other people's money isn't the same as owning it. But you do own a significant portion, don't you? You're the founder and majority shareholder. I couldn't deny it without lying outright. My personal net worth was approximately $47 million, built through equity in my firm, investment returns, and careful financial planning over 15 years. The point is, Margaret continued, we shouldn't need anonymous benefactors when we have family members who could help. It's embarrassing, frankly. Embarrassing to who? To all of us. It makes us look like a family that doesn't take care of its own. I looked around the table at faces that ranged from sympathetic to accusatory. David looked embarrassed by the confrontation but didn't defend me. Lisa was nodding along with Margaret's points. Uncle Peter was studiously avoiding eye contact. I'm sorry you find the situation embarrassing, I said finally. That's not an apology. It's deflection, Margaret snapped. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Do I? Yes. You've chosen individual success over family responsibility. You've built wealth while watching your relatives struggle. And now you sit at our dinner table acting like you don't understand why that's problematic. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was spreading beyond anyone's control. Around the table, relatives shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to pile on or try to diffuse the tension. You know what the real problem is, Margaret continued, her voice rising. You're not really one of us anymore. You've changed so much that you don't even think like family. You think like a stranger. Maybe because I'm treated like one. Oh, please. You're treated exactly like family. You're invited to everything, included in all our traditions, welcomed in this house every year. Welcomed so you can lecture me about my financial obligations. Welcomed so you can remember where you came from and who supported you when you were nobody. The words hit like a physical blow. When you were nobody. Margaret had finally said what she'd been thinking for years, that my success was an aberration, that I'd somehow forgotten my proper place in the family hierarchy. I see, I said quietly. Do you? Because I don't think you understand how fortunate you've been to have this family, to have these connections, to have people who believed in you before you proved yourself. What exactly did this family do to support my career? We gave you roots, values, a foundation. We taught you the importance of hard work and education. And what have I given back? What have you given back? Margaret laughed bitterly. You show up once a year, bring expensive wine that makes everyone else feel cheap, and act like you're doing us a favor by gracing us with your presence. That's not fair, David said quietly, finally finding his voice. Isn't it? Margaret turned to him. When was the last time Rebecca offered to help with anything? When has she ever contributed to family expenses or supported anyone's education or helped with medical bills? She doesn't have to, David started. Of course she doesn't have to. No one has to do anything, but family members want to help each other. They offer assistance without being asked. They share their good fortune. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin beside my plate. You're absolutely right, Margaret, I said, keeping my voice calm despite the fury building in my chest. I haven't been acting like family. I've been acting like a stranger. Finally, some acknowledgement. "You're not one of us," she continued, pointing at me with her wine glass. "You never really belonged here. You've made that clear through your choices and your priorities." The entire table nodded in agreement. Lisa murmured, "Exactly." Uncle Peter grunted approval. David looked uncomfortable but didn't disagree. They were all aligned against me, all convinced that I'd somehow betrayed family values by building a successful career without constantly subsidizing their expenses. "I understand," I said simply. "Good. Maybe now we can move forward with realistic expectations about what this family means to each other." I excused myself from the table and walked into the house, ostensibly to use the bathroom, but actually to make a phone call. In Margaret's guest powder room, I dialed my office number and accessed the secure voicemail system I used for urgent client matters. "This is Rebecca Chin, authorization code 847,392. I need to schedule an emergency trust dissolution for Monday morning. Chen Family Education Fund. Account number 4,471,293. Complete liquidation and fund transfer to my personal accounts. All automatic distributions should be canceled effective immediately." I hung up and returned to the terrace, where dessert was being served and conversation had moved on to safer topics like vacation plans and local politics. No one mentioned my brief absence or asked if I was feeling well. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I participated in conversations about the weather and Margaret's garden renovations. I admired photos of grandchildren and listened to updates about neighborhood developments. I played my role as the successful but disconnected family member who everyone tolerated but no longer truly welcomed. At 11 o'clock, I announced that I was tired and would be heading back to the city, rather than staying overnight as originally planned. "So soon?" Margaret asked with theatrical disappointment. "We were hoping you'd join us for the group photo tomorrow morning." "I have an early meeting." "Of course you do. Work before family, as always." I didn't respond to the barb. I simply collected my purse, said goodnight to everyone, and walked to my car under a sky full of stars that reflected off the dark bay waters. As I drove back through the empty highway toward San Francisco, I thought about the trust fund that would be dissolved Monday morning. 10 years of anonymous support, $1.2 million in principal plus accumulated returns, distributed to family members who had just declared that I wasn't really one of them. The irony was perfect. They wanted me to act like family, while simultaneously announcing that I didn't belong. They demanded financial support while rejecting my membership in the group that supposedly deserved that support. Monday morning arrived with typical San Francisco fog rolling across the bay and settling over the financial district like a gray blanket. I was in my office by 7, reviewing the trust dissolution paperwork that my legal team had prepared over the weekend. The Chen Family Education Fund would be completely liquidated by close of business, with all assets transferred to my personal investment accounts. The anonymous benefactor who had supported family education for a decade would simply disappear, leaving no forwarding address or explanation. My phone rang at 9:15. Margaret's number appeared on the caller ID. "Rebecca, I hope you had a safe drive home Saturday night." "I did, thank you. I wanted to call because I've been thinking about our conversation at dinner. I may have been too harsh in my comments." "May have been." "Well, I was frustrated, but family is family, and we shouldn't let money issues divide us." "I agree completely." "Good. I'm glad you understand. Actually, I'm calling because we have some wonderful news about the education fund." I waited, saying nothing. Our benefactor has approved a special distribution to help with the reunion expenses and some other family needs. Isn't that wonderful? What kind of special distribution? $50,000. Enough to cover this year's reunion costs and help several family members with some unexpected expenses. I almost laughed. Margaret was calling to tell me about money I had provided, money that had just been canceled, money that no longer existed. That is wonderful news, I said. I thought you'd be pleased. It shows that some people still understand family obligations, even if they're not technically family themselves. The casual cruelty of the comment was breathtaking. Margaret was praising my generosity while simultaneously excluding me from the family that supposedly benefited from it. Margaret, can I ask you something? Of course. What if this anonymous benefactor decided to stop providing support? What would the family do then? Stop providing support? Why would they do that? They've been so generous for so many years. But hypothetically, what if they felt like their contributions weren't appreciated or that the family didn't deserve continued assistance? That's a strange question, Rebecca. Why would you even think about that? Just curious about contingency planning. Well, I suppose we'd have to find other sources of support. Maybe family members who have been blessed with success would finally step up and take responsibility. Maybe they would. Speaking of which, I was hoping you'd reconsider your position about helping with family expenses. Not that we need it with our benefactor's support, but it would mean a lot symbolically. I'll definitely reconsider my position. Wonderful. I knew you'd come around once you had time to think about it properly. We ended the call with Margaret's cheerful assumption that I would soon be writing checks to supplement the anonymous fund she had no idea I controlled. At 10:30, my assistant knocked on my door. Rebecca, you have a call from Margaret Chen. She sounds upset. I picked up the phone to find Margaret's voice strained and confused. Rebecca, something terrible has happened with the education fund. What kind of terrible? I just got a call from the bank. They're saying the account has been closed, that all the money has been withdrawn. That's strange. Did they say why? They said the account holder requested immediate liquidation and fund transfer. But that's impossible. The benefactor would never do that without talking to me first. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a disaster. Do you understand what this means? Tommy's tuition payment was supposed to come from that account next week. Peter's medical expenses, Rachel's college fund. Everything was dependent on that money. I could hear the panic building in her voice as she realized the scope of the problem. Have you tried contacting the benefactor directly? That's just it. I don't have direct contact information. Everything went through the bank and the trust administration. The benefactor always remained anonymous. That seems like poor planning. Poor planning? Rebecca, this fund has been reliable for 10 years. The benefactor has never missed a distribution, never changed the terms, never even reduced the amount. Why would they suddenly disappear? Maybe they felt like their contributions weren't appreciated. What do you mean? Maybe they heard that the family they were supporting didn't really consider them family. Maybe they decided to direct their charitable giving elsewhere. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Rebecca, do you know something about this? I know that charitable giving is usually based on relationship and mutual respect. When those things disappear, so does the motivation to give. You're talking in riddles. What does any of this have to do with our benefactor? What if your benefactor was someone who attended Saturday's dinner? Someone who heard your speech about family loyalty and financial responsibility? Another pause, longer this time. That's impossible. Our benefactor is a business associate of my father's, someone from his importing business. Are you sure about that? Of course I'm sure. That's what the bank told me when the fund was established. Banks tell people what they're instructed to say by the account holders. Rebecca, what are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. The Chen Family Education Fund was established and funded by someone who wanted to support family education anonymously. For 10 years, that person contributed approximately $120,000 annually to ensure that family members could afford college tuition and medical expenses. Yes, that's correct. And on Saturday night, the family declared that this person wasn't really family and didn't belong at family gatherings. We were talking about you, not the benefactor. Were you? The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had been disconnected. Rebecca, Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Are you saying that you? I'm saying that charitable giving requires a relationship between the giver and the recipient. When that relationship is damaged, the giving stops. You're the benefactor. I was the benefactor. For 10 years. For 10 years. But why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to help family members without creating obligations or changing our relationships. I wanted to support education and help with emergencies because I loved you all, not because I wanted credit or recognition. And now I've been told that I'm not really family and don't belong at family gatherings. So I'm redirecting my charitable giving to people who might appreciate it more. Rebecca, please. This is a misunderstanding. We didn't mean. You meant exactly what you said. I'm not one of you. I never belonged. You made that very clear. But the family needs this money. Tommy's tuition, Peter's bills, Rachel's college fund. The family has decided that I'm not really family. Non-family members don't have obligations to support your expenses. This will devastate everyone. Everyone will have to find other sources of support. Maybe family members who have been blessed with success will finally step up and take responsibility. I was using Margaret's exact words from Saturday night, and we both knew it. What can we do to fix this? You can remember this conversation the next time you decide to lecture someone about family loyalty while simultaneously excluding them from the family. Rebecca, please don't do this. I'm not doing anything. I'm simply practicing what you preached, remembering where I belong and acting accordingly. I hung up without waiting for her response. Over the next week, I received 17 phone calls from various family members. David called to apologize and begged me to reconsider. Lisa called crying about Rachel's college fund. Uncle Peter called to ask if there was any way to restore the medical expense coverage. Even distant cousins I rarely spoke to called to express their shock and request my help. I didn't return any of the calls. The following Saturday, I received an overnight letter from Margaret. Inside was a handwritten note on her personal stationery. Rebecca, I have spent this week thinking about what happened at the reunion and what I said to you. I was wrong. I was wrong about your contributions to this family, wrong about your loyalty, and wrong about your place in our family. You have been the most generous and supportive family member any of us could ask for. And instead of recognizing that, I criticized you for not being generous enough. I don't know how to undo the damage I've caused, but I want you to know that you are absolutely one of us. You have always belonged here, and our family is weaker without your support. I hope you can forgive a foolish old woman who forgot how to appreciate the people she loves most. Please come home to us. Margaret. It was a genuine apology. Perhaps the first one Margaret had ever written in her life. But apologies don't erase the impact of public humiliation or restore trust that has been broken. I wrote back, "Dear Margaret, thank you for your letter. I accept your apology and hope we can rebuild our relationship over time. However, the Chin Family Education Fund will not be restored. Anonymous charitable giving requires trust and mutual respect, both of which need time to develop. I suggest that family members who have been blessed with success consider stepping up to provide the support that is needed. As you mentioned at dinner, family members should offer help without being asked. I hope someone will follow that advice. Rebecca." 6 months later, David called to update me on family news. Tommy was attending community college instead of engineering school because the family couldn't afford university tuition. Peter was still struggling with medical bills. Rachel had taken a part-time job to save for college. "Margaret has been putting together family contributions," David said. "She's trying to recreate the education fund using donations from family members." "How's that working?" "Not well. Everyone's struggling with their own expenses. We've raised about $8,000 total." "That's a start." "Rebecca, I know what happened at the reunion was awful, and I know you don't owe us anything. But is there any chance?" "David, I'm not the same person who quietly funded a family trust for 10 years while being told I don't contribute enough. That person doesn't exist anymore." "What do you mean?" "I mean I've learned that appreciation and respect can't be purchased with anonymous generosity. They have to be earned through authentic relationships. We appreciate you. We all do. You appreciate my money. There's a difference." "That's not fair, isn't it? When I was contributing $120,000 annually to family education, I was still being lectured about my lack of family loyalty. When I stopped contributing, suddenly everyone wanted to repair our relationships. What changed wasn't my value as a family member. What changed was my availability as a funding source." David was quiet for a long moment. "You're right," he said finally. "We took you for granted." "Yes, you did. Is there any way to fix that?" "Time will tell." A year later, I attended Margaret's 70th birthday party. The guest list was smaller than usual. Several family members had moved away for better job opportunities, and the financial stress had taken its toll on family unity. But the people who remained seemed more genuine in their interactions, less focused on maintaining appearances, and more interested in authentic connection. Margaret pulled me aside during the evening. "I want to thank you for coming tonight," she said. "I wouldn't miss your birthday. I wasn't sure you'd want to be here. After everything that happened." That was a long time ago. Not that long. And the consequences are still affecting everyone. She gestured toward the smaller gathering, the more modest catering, the absence of several family members who had left town seeking better opportunities. "Do you regret what you did?" I considered the question seriously. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret standing up for myself. You taught us something important about taking people for granted. What did I teach you? That generosity without appreciation becomes resentment. That family relationships require mutual respect, and that wealth doesn't create obligations. Love does. Those are valuable lessons, expensive lessons. The most important ones usually are. Margaret nodded, looking out at her family gathered on the terrace. "Do you think we'll ever get back to where we were?" "I don't think any of us would want to go back to where we were. We can build something better going forward. Something more honest, something more real." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the past year and the changes it had brought. The family was smaller, but closer. The financial support was gone, but the emotional manipulation had disappeared with it. People who stayed in contact did so because they valued the relationship, not because they hoped for financial assistance. I had redirected my charitable giving to educational scholarships for first-generation college students, young people who understood the value of opportunities and didn't take support for granted. The Chen Family Education Fund had become the Rebecca Chen Foundation, supporting dozens of students annually while requiring no family drama or guilt-inducing lectures. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling behavior that damages relationships. Sometimes family members need to experience the consequences of their choices before they understand the value of what they've lost. And sometimes the person who walks away from the table is the one who finally understands their own worth.